Okay, so as we start reassembling this reel, we're going to be cleaning, greasing the parts and reassembly all at the same time. I do it that way just to keep everything in order. You can clean everything at once and grease it as you put it in, but I just prefer doing it this way. So we're going to start with, let's see, we'll start with this little saddle and this gear. So on the saddle, remember your ramps, your angled ramps face down. The top of this gets grease. So we're going to squirt a little bit in here. And the part, this is the gear that sits in that saddle. So I'm going to squirt a little bit of grease inside the gear teeth here. Not much. And I'm going to just run it around with my fingers. Then we're going to flip it over and we're going to do this opposite side the exact same way. Squirt a little. Not much. Maybe less than a fourth of it probably. And we use our fingers to even that grease out. That way there's not a big blob of it sitting in there. These two slide together. Now I noticed the only noticeable grease was actually on the top side of the saddle, and this is how it came from the factory unless it's just worn off. But I'm going to go ahead and have plenty of grease sitting in that saddle. I've already greased the rods that this rides on, so we're going to slide it down. And if anybody notices how shaky I am, I probably should have ate before I did this. I have not eaten today. Okay, so when that's together correctly, this whole setup will sit all the way to the bottom. The saddle sits on top of this metal piece inside here, and you can look and see that your angles match each other, your ramps. So I've got a white ramp there going that way, and a black ramp coming up. Same thing. And then when you push your release, it slides right up. When you release it, it slides right back down. Alright, so that gear is done. So now we're going to move on to our drag washers and gear. Alright, so we'll grease this closer to last, but I'll put a little bit of grease in here. We're going to take our Q-tip and smear it all around. And I'm going to set that back down. This one here, I'm just going to put a very thin, small little dab. I'm going to mash it in my fingers. I'm going to smear it around this star washer here. Slide it down. It has a square hole that matches up with the square at the bottom. We're going to take our carbon fiber washer here, which is stock. Same thing, one little drop of grease. Mix it in my fingers, and I'm just kind of lightly putting a very small amount of grease on that. Slide that on. I'm just going to kind of rub the back of this with what's on my fingers. Rub the inside of this. I'm going to slide it on. So there's really no accumulation. It's greased, but it's not heavy. Now this gear will have to line up with the gear that's already in it, and it's there. Now we're going to squirt another little squirt here, and same thing, fingertips on the, smear it around the carbon fiber drag washer. Just like this. It sits in here. And I'm going to take this one. I'm just going to kind of rub what's on my fingertips on it. I'll do both sides just so everything's nice and greased and protected. That may be excessive, however, the amount of grease I'm using is minimal. Alright, so there's what you're left with. Now we want to grease these micro gear teeth, or even regular teeth in any other gear, or any other baitcaster. So what we're going to do is put minimal grease in these teeth. Not a lot. You don't want any hanging over either side of it. So we'll do just a little bit here. Now, that's it. We're not going to go all the way around it. That'll come later. We want minimal. Alright, putting my spring on my rod here. My other spring on my rod here. I'm going to take my Q-tip that already has some grease on it, and I'm going to just grease the inside of this sleeve, and I'll go ahead and put some grease on the outside of the sleeve. And the teeth on the sleeve need to line up with the teeth in the top of the drag washer there. And that's done. I'm going to grab a little bit of grease off my Q-tip on my fingertips. Now I've got the little copper washer, the tiny little one. I'm going to set it on top of the sleeve we just put in. And now we're back to our side plate. Everything in here is clean, everything is greased. I'm going to stop the camera. We're going to reassemble the side plate, and then we're going to finish under your drag adjustment knob. We're almost done. Alright, so we've already cleaned the inside of this. It's already lubed. So we're going to very gently slide it back on. If anything comes poking out, fix it. There we go. Should fit nice and easy, nothing poking out. Alright, now we put our 4 screws back in. I start with the bottom 2. I don't tighten them, just put them in and get them started. But they're the easiest to access. And being as tight of a spot as that is on part of this, it can be a little difficult to get started. Okay, we'll go to the top one inside the spool up here. Then we have to access from the inside of the spool. Always start your screws backwards till they click. I mean, I won't click. It clicked twice for me, but that way you keep from cross threading. So these now you can kind of snug them up a little. Just don't overdo it. Still holding, trying to keep pressure, pulling the 2 sides together. This is where I have lighting issues, is trying to see the black screws on the black reels. I think it's old age. Your hardest screw to start is going to be the one that's in the underneath your spool release here, under that handle. But it is doable. Alright, that one's nice and snug now. Back up here, unsnug. nice and snug. You don't want to over tighten them to where you can't get them out the next time that you need to work on it. They come pretty tight from the factory. This one's still going nice and snug. So the last thing I do, just double check them, make sure they're snug. And this last little tiny pinhead screw in here, nice and snug. We also still have to do our worm gear. Do that right quick before I... let's see. I'll stop the video and start back. To do the worm gear, before I stop the video, I'm going to go ahead and reinsert the spool. Now the spool you can clean. I should have done it before I put it back in. I'm going to pop all the brakes up. Pull it back out. I guess I was wrong. I'm not stopping the video yet. Okay, so we're going to pull this out. So on the spool you want to just clean around all these edges where it normally can ride. We're going to clean just all the surfaces off. I'm not getting anything here on my Q-tip. Now where they will get dirty is where the brakes ride. Clean that real good. It's still pretty clean. I'm going to flip 2 brakes back down. Now we're going to insert the spool. She's back in. If you have any problems with this door, you can always lubricate this little rod that keeps it attached. Alright, and I'm going to move this back up to number 4 where it was, this brake. If I can. May have to have the drag installed. If you do have a problem adjusting the brake, pop it off, pop it back on. You want to make sure everything is backed off. Oh, maybe going the right direction might help. Alright, put that back on number 4 where it was. Okay. Alright, stop the video, start it back. Okay, so we're going to take what we have here on the towel. We're going to go ahead and clean it piece by piece. It's all small stuff. I'll grab a little small piece of paper towel. Copper washer, your drag, your C-shaped washers. The easiest thing I found is if you keep them in order, like I'll leave this one the way it came off, set it on the towel that way, leave this one the way it came off, set it on the towel that way. Here's a little copper washer, goes on top of and it goes, actually will go underneath this washer. Okay. I'm going to take the inside of the drag tensioner here. Just make sure it's clean. Alright, reassembly here. So we have our little, tiny little copper washer goes on first. This is the one that doesn't always want to come out right when you start taking the reel apart. I put these two here together, the concave C washers, and I will slide them on. They should match up with the shape of the shaft here. Okay, so when they're on, they look like that. They don't sit flat against each other. Then we have this copper washer that goes on next. And then our aluminum washer here that's square. Now, you're going to want the divoted side up. That's for your spring. You don't want to screw it on very far. Might help to push your release down now while you do this, while you start it, just to help hold things still. Spring. Now your drag knob. So you're going to line your drag knob up with your shaft. So I'll pop this up and get it where, let's see, that will work. Everything here has to line up. Okay, see, once you're lined up, that'll just slide right down on there. It will screw on, and it's screwing that square nut in. Pull this back up some. Next is your handle. I'll loosen that for a second because I hadn't wiped this off good. You can clean this with a Q-tip also. It doesn't need any kind of grease or anything. Now what you can do is, if your handles don't spin nice and free, you can put a little drop of oil like right in there, right in there. That'll help keep them nice and free. These are still spinning just fine. Alright, so you're going to put your drag star on, pull down on it. Then you're going to set your handle on top of it. Now you can pull down on the handle. You don't have a whole lot sticking out here. Make sure you're careful on this. Go backwards first so you don't strip it. Even if you go backwards, make sure it looks straight before you start threading it on. That just clicked in place. Alright, now you're going to, once that's on, you can tighten your drag on down. That'll give you more room to crank your nut down. Then you put your wrench back on it, 10mm. Get her snug. Don't over tighten, because see, now it's, I can still do finger tight here. She's still going on. Okay, you just want her snug. Remember, there's not a whole lot of teeth there for this thing to grab. So if you look at your nut now, you're going to want a point on this nut to line up with that hole. And it should line up just perfectly. And then when you set your lock on, it should also, I may have told you wrong. If it doesn't fall in, adjust your nut until it does. Back it up just a little. Try it again. Because you don't want to force this in. You want it sitting, you want it to sit perfect like that, but inside that hole. So back it up a little more. Still not sitting flush. Now she's flush. She went right in. This is your little Phillips head here. Screw it down. Okay. Stop the video and I'll start it back because next thing is important. Okay. We still need to do the worm gear and that's fine. But the first thing you're going to want to do after you put this thing back together is just start hitting it and spinning it. Remember, we greased just partial on that main gear. It's not even all greased yet. So you're going to want to sit here. You're going to make sure your drag is tight enough to spin the spool at least. This shouldn't be tight yet. So you're going to want to go super slow. You don't want to be slinging all your brand new grease you just put in here all over the reel. So we're going to go super slow here. And you're going to do this for about 2 minutes. And I don't have a timer on, but all you're doing is you're making sure all the grease inside this thing just gets nice and even while you're just sitting here doing this. If you can't spin it with your finger, something's probably wrong. You either got it back together wrong or you didn't get any grease or oil in it. It should be super, super light, super easy. The longer you do this, the better. That's the sad part. It takes patience right here because you just want to spin it and see how long it'll sit there and spin. So I feel you. All right, I'm going to stop the camera and we're going to tackle this worm gear right quick. Okay, your worm gear, it's right down here. This is important. You don't want to be cranking it while you're trying to clean the worm gear, especially with Q-tip, because what happens is that worm gear will grab this Q-tip and suck all the cotton up into your gear. Then it's a nightmare. So what I do, look at that, one swipe. I crank it just a little and I'll see new, fresh, greasy part that I haven't wiped yet. And I'll crank it and I'll just barely go around, cleaning a little at a time, and then I'll move it to the other side, start over. But if this worm gear is moving at all, it's going to suck this Q-tip in there, so be careful with that. Just make sure it's still while you're wiping it. Okay, now that's pretty stinking clean. Now we're going to grab a Q-tip and we're going to put some rubbing alcohol on it. And I'm going to just go over it with the rubbing alcohol. And I still haven't spun this thing fast yet. Now you'll see the rubbing alcohol is going to get it wet. We'll go to the other end. And you don't get much of a turn before you have new stuff that you haven't got to yet. The other option would have been to disassemble the entire reel from the inside just so we could get to the worm gear here, and I don't normally find that that's necessary. Alright, so we're going to crank her around. Now There's some wet spots on there from the rubbing alcohol right now. They should dry up pretty quick, or else I still have a little bit of residue on it. I'll take a dry Q-tip. Try to get her dry. Okay. So she looks nice and dry. It's just a piece of plastic in there with a piece of metal riding inside it. So now we're going to take our real grease and we're going to squirt a little bit down in those gears by a little. I mean, I'm only trying to get it down inside the teeth. I'm not going all the way across it. I'm just hitting dab, dab, dab. I'm going to start cranking her. And you'll see it start to move across the reel. As you go back and forth and back and forth. And we don't want to be too excessive, but we want it all nice and greased. It's going to keep this reel nice and smooth. So I can see more on this side where we started than this side, so I'm going to dab some inside these grooves. But not much. Okay, so I have a couple little dabs in there. Here we go. And then if it looks like it's that you have an excess, you can always take a Q-tip and wipe that top of that off, because you really only need it down in the teeth. Now we're speeding up as we reel, if you notice. Speeding our retrieve up. So just took a little bit of that grease out of there. Alright, let's give her a try. Whoops. And she's spinning. Alright, now we'll push the button, pop it back, make sure it's nice and smooth. Just keep clicking her. She is smooth, smooth, smooth. Alright, I'm going to stop the camera. Anyway guys, that's going to wrap it up. Hope this helps you. Remember, on the outside, same thing. Keep the outside of your reel clean. Clean the little bars here that your guide for your worm washer glides on. Just try to keep everything nice and clean. But I hope this video helps you guys to be confident enough to look into your own stuff. Remember, take pictures. Every part you take off, take a picture until you get used to it. If you can find some older, cheaper reels that people are getting rid of or don't want anymore, or that you just have laying around, start with them and just kind of learn the ins and outs of putting them together and taking them apart before you start messing with the higher dollar reels. It'll really help you with your confidence and kind of learn what goes where. From what I've seen, they're pretty much all the same on the inside as far as what the part looks like and where it goes. And anyway, hope this helps y'all. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you guys soon. Take care.